I'm Sarah Abel-Hassan from SoftChalk, and on the line with me today is Richard Smith from Harvard Community College. Today, Richard will share his own best practices of adding accessibility to online courses. Just a little bit of background on the series. We developed the series to give you the chance to learn from educators from across the country and what they consider to be their best practices in online course design. Between now and September, you can join us for monthly webinars that will highlight a best practice in online course design. Each of these webinars will focus on a best practice for one or more of the 8 Quality Matters higher education and K-12 standards and the tools such as SoftChalk that made these quality courses possible. The series will conclude on October 1st in Baltimore, Maryland at the 6th Annual Quality Matters Conference and the first ever SoftChalk User Conference with the best practices in online course design sessions that will occur on October 1st. We hope that you'll be able to join us this fall. I will be posting the links to the conferences in the chat area. For those of you who are interested in learning more about the conferences, you can check out those links. I'm also joined today by Jim Snyder from Quality Matters, and Jim will tell you a little bit about the Quality Matters program.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, I'm Jim Snyder. I'm the Marketing Director here at Quality Matters, and we are excited to co-host the Best Practices webinars with SoftChalk. Next slide, please. A little bit about Quality Matters. There's really 4 points within Quality Matters and the Quality Matters program. The first that you've already seen a little bit of is a set of standards for the design of online and blended courses. The second is really our peer review process for reviewing and improving online and blended or hybrid courses. So a way for you to go through and review and improve the courses that you have developed. We also have faculty support tools for instructional developers to help design their courses. And then interwoven with all of that is our professional development platform and program. So we have an entire suite of professional development offerings to go through and how to use the rubrics as well as how to go through and design and improve your online courses. Next slide. Quality Matters is we're really a virtual nonprofit academic organization. We are headquarters in Maryland, but we are really a virtual organization. We're a not-for-profit subsidiary of Maryland Online, and we started back in 2003 through a partnership with Maryland Online, utilizing funding from a FIPSI grant, really to sit around to develop a set of standards that you see today. It's been an iterative process and a continuous improvement process over the last 11 years to develop a strong set of standards that have been adopted by many different institutions and organizations, from higher ed to K-12 to publishers and government and corporate and other Fortune 500 and other organizations. Next slide. So just to give you an idea of where our subscribers exist, we are located almost in all 50 states. We still have 3 that have yet to come on board, as well as we have some international subscribers in 7 or 8 different countries. So we're in almost all the states and all over the world too. So we continue to grow. Next slide, we can dive in a little bit more. With about 800, a little bit more than 800 subscribing institutions and around 110 individual subscribers. So if your institution is not a subscriber but you are interested in diving deeper into what the standards and rubrics are, you can become an individual subscriber. And we have trained through our professional development offerings more than 25,000 faculty. We have reviewed more than 5,000 courses which have gone through our peer review process, and we have broad application throughout the higher ed world, the K-12 world, publisher world, and the continuing professional education market. And then lastly, really, and this is the sort of focus of these best practices webinars, it's around our rubrics. They were initially developed at the higher ed level for college credit courses, and then subsequently we partnered with various different organizations who were leaders in the different spaces. The K-12 secondary rubric was created in partnership with the Florida Virtual Schools, with partnership with Wiley and Sons for the development of the educational publishers rubric, and then with UPSEA, the University Professional and Continuing Education Association, for the development of the Continuing and Professional Educational rubric, which is for non-credit courses that we have looked into as well, and we have rubrics for all of those. And lastly, here are the 8 standards that are for the K-12 and higher ed rubric, and they really work for all of the rubrics in general. And so these are the ones that we have developed this series, this webinar series around, and some of them, basically standards 2 through 6, are all interlined and work together to create, you use all of these to create a high quality online or blended course, and that's really what Quality Matters does, and provides assistance to faculty and instructional developers and others on how to design and build effective online courses. So that's a little bit about Quality Matters.
Thank you, Jim. And if anyone else has any other questions about Quality Matters, feel free to put those in the questions panel, and we'll be able to answer those along the way as well. For those of you who might not be familiar with SoftChalk, for over a decade we have been helping educators create engaging, interactive learning content for both online learning and for use in interactive and flipped classrooms. Educators at thousands of universities, colleges, and school districts are using SoftChalk, and we've been honored a number of times with industry awards for our products. SoftChalk Cloud is an internet-based platform that provides a central location where you can create, manage, and share your learning content. And SoftChalk Cloud provides ultimate flexibility, enabling educators to collaborate, manage, and share their online content for delivery anytime, anywhere, on any device. And before we begin, I would also like to mention that all attendees will be muted during the presentation, but if you have any comments or questions, feel free to use the GoToWebinar questions panel and to submit any questions or comments that you have. We'll either answer them in the panel or we will save them for the Q&A portion that will be towards the end of the presentation. And we encourage open discussion, so if there's anything that you want to add throughout the presentation, we do encourage open discussion, and we encourage you to share your own best practices and tips throughout the presentation as well. So now I am pleased to introduce our presenter for this afternoon, Richard Smith. Richard is an instructional designer and adjunct faculty member at Harford Community College. He is also a master reviewer for Quality Matters and has shared over 100 reviews with them. So Richard will be sharing his own best practices today for adding accessibility to your online courses. So Richard, thank you so much for joining us. And if you're ready, I can go ahead and give you the screen.
Go ahead. Okay. Is that showing up now?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. Like Sarah mentioned, I really want this to be as interactive as possible. Sometimes webinars are not the best for that.
Muted.
Sometimes could be a bit one-sided. I've done this presentation not as much on the tech angle. There obviously is a tech angle to the accessibility, but I want this to bring about discussion about accessibility on the online courses in general, and obviously in specific how SoftChalk is able to help that. But I do want it to be a broader discussion about just accessibility in general. So
Unmuted.
mention something, a very SoftChalk specific thing. I'm also just going to talk in general about how accessibility may be a problem with this typical issue, and we'll go from there. I am an instructional designer and adjunct faculty at Harvard Community College in Maryland. One of my little sort of my side, I want to say hobbies, but that's sort of a poor, certainly not a hobby, is that I've been sort of trying to move people to have things accessible. My department is not in charge of like web pages, things like that throughout the college, but obviously I have lots of web content, things like that. So I've been a big proponent for accessibility for years, and that's what I really want more people to have that in mind. It's difficult. Even in my own college, I am not in charge of the college homepage. The college homepage at my own college does not follow accessibility guidelines. It's one of those things you mention to people many times, they just don't listen, things like that. So if we can get as many people possible through webinars and other things to sort of buy into that making things accessible is a good idea for everyone, the better. And that's what my hope for these kind of webinars are. So let's hop into my presentation here. First thing I did was I just went to the SoftChalk webpage. I wanted to see what SoftChalk said on their own webpage about accessibility, and this is their commitment to accessibility. That basically everything that gets created in SoftChalk is accessible and compliant with what's called Section 508. Probably most of you know about Section 508, even though I'll mention it briefly a couple different times. But I do like that SoftChalk does have this commitment. We do see other vendors. Our LMSs, most of them tend to have the same commitment, and that is a good thing. So you as an end user should be very good on that. Now, let's talk about the accessibility. And I'm going to mention another term in a few minutes, usability. But accessibility, I just grabbed this from Wikipedia, everyone's least favorite resource, but this was actually a great definition. And I'm actually going to read it all out. Accessibility is the degree to which a product, device, service, or environment is available to as many people as possible. And that's key right there, I think. Accessibility can be viewed as the ability to access and benefit from some system or entity. So basically, everyone can use your service. So we want everyone to use our web pages or our course content. So there you go. Now something gets, lately accessibility, the terminology has sort of gone to the side and we talk about usability. And this is a definition I got from a consulting group, and I thought it was a long definition, but it also showed the different components of what's called usability. Usability is different than accessibility. People, like I said, tend to merge it together. Usability is basically just how usable your content, how usable your interface, how usable everything is. Common sense, if you can navigate through it. That's usability. So usability, accessibility, different. But what I believe is if you make content accessible, you're probably leading your way into better usability. If you make your content usable, you're going to lead your way to better accessibility. They work hand in hand. And that's what I've put in this presentation, what I think SoftChalk has done a real good job at. Now, there are reasons to do that. And I put first on the screen is that there's a law. But before I do that, why should you make things accessible? Why should you make things usable? First of all, you want everyone to use your content. You want everyone to be able to access it. So before there's any law involved or anything, I think that if, I teach courses. I teach a geography course this summer that starts next week. A course that I really need to get in and actually redevelop in the next 3 days, but, that's normal for everyone. But when I'm doing that redeveloping, one of the things I keep in mind is that if I have a blind student in my course, I want him to have no problem, or him or her, whatever. If I've got someone who has low visibility, deaf, anything, or even someone who just doesn't understand content very well, I want it to be accessible and usable for everyone. So we talk a lot about these rules, these laws, and threats of lawsuits and things like that. But remember, more than anything else, it's just common sense. But there is this law. It's actually part of U.S. code, so law might be more of a regulation. Whatever, Section 508 of the U.S. code basically requires federal, and that's a key, federal agencies to adhere to a minimal level of accessibility. Now, universities, colleges, everything, even private universities, you're getting financial aid from federal resources. It can be interpreted, and that's a much more discussion than we can take here, that possibly you have to stick to this code. Like I said, it doesn't even matter if there's a code exists. You should. And at the very least, you should have that minimal level of accessibility and strive for even more. And the second point I put on there is this law can be loosely interpreted, and it has been for years now. Every time I think we're getting some kind of clarification on 508, it gets more muddled. So once again, let's just make things accessible. Let's make things usable for all. And as long as we're making that step, then we're going to meet 508, even if it doesn't pertain to us. So we should go for both. Now, SoftChalk is a resource that we use at our college a lot for content. One of the reasons we like it as much as anything else is that most of these kind of features are built in. And I'm going to go in through some of these different features that SoftChalk helps out for accessibility. And like I said, we'll talk about what's the problems of accessibility, based on this. So one of the reasons I'm not even going to show you lots of technical things is you almost don't need to. I don't work for SoftChalk. Sarah does. But one of the reasons you don't have to do too much is because SoftChalk's going to do lots of it for you. And this is something we really look for our faculty. Because as an instructional designer at my college, I can't look at every instructor that I work with. I may design a lot's part of their course, but lots of times they're involved in the actual creation of their content. I can't go and look at everything to see if everything's accessible. I really just don't have the time in a day to do all that. If I can give them a tool like SoftChalk that does most of that work for them, I'm all for it. So let's hop right into the part of software. And like I said, type messages to Sarah. If you've got questions, things like that, Sarah will share them for me. Instead of just having a long question and answer I'll have at the end, we'll do that per each thing. Now, this is an interesting one. This gets a little techy in that SoftChalk uses something called cascading style sheets, CSS, for page layout. And Sarah, I'll have to admit this, that lots of times we hear people don't love SoftChalk because they find the different style choices sort of boring. I will actually say that's actually a positive. Now, I'm not saying that SoftChalk, probably some of them are in the color, right there you can see on the screen there. Let's say the second one to the right, the purple background with the white, it's a little blah, but here's where that maybe blahness is a positive, is that cascading style sheets essentially take, I'm trying to get this to a lower level, but when we used to design web pages, we'd put all the codes and everything for the different styles all built into the page. Cascading style sheet sort of removes that style guide outside of it so that the presentation and the style is separate. And it makes it just clearer in general. What that does is it gives people who are using things like screen readers, things like that, or even people who just don't understand how to navigate content very well. Let's take the accessibility out of it, the more the usability factor. It makes it more streamlined common sense. Is it fancy looking pages? No. Could it maybe look a little more hip, up to date? Sure it can. But what happens is this built-in cascading style sheet makes that page layout easier for everyone to use. The way I always do it, even more than usability, is when we go back to the accessibility thing is I've worked with one of our deaf students who's taken, I think he took every online course our college offered. I sat with him a few times and listened to how he navigated things through the JAWS screen reader software, and it was fascinating. I can't even imagine being able to surf the web like this. He could, he'd hear it tab over and it would say it, and he actually had it sped up fast, and he was able to navigate a web page instead of using his eyes, but listening to these content. But what I would look is, I would look at a page that was a very simple navigation, and I would hear the content being read to him, and I would also see a page with very complicated navigation, complicated layout, and I would also hear that, and I would realize that that complicated layout could look beautiful, but for him it just was complicated. So I always go back to that screen reader. If you can get JAWS screen reader software, something comparable, take a look at it. Use it for your own. You blindfold yourself. Listen to the way it navigates through your web page. It's fascinating. So this cascading style sheets is built into Blackboard, and you don't have to do anything. You don't actually have to use the built-in style sheets, but most of the time you're going to use one of the built-in ones. Right there, you've got lots of accessibility taken care of for you with doing nothing. Any questions at this point, Sarah?
No, I don't think so. I think you're covering most of the questions.
Okay, you just interrupt me if you do, and I'm
Okay.
just going to keep moving on.
Yep.
Okay, this goes right along with that. When you're using one of these styles from SoftChalk, and this is another one that sometimes people say it's a little boring looking, got the little pen down here on the bottom and the purple background and the different chat pages. But here's the thing is, that's simple. Everyone can go in there, whether they've got a visibility problem, they're using JAWS, or they're just new at these things. They know right there where to go, previous, next, different pages. Now, also built into SoftChalk is the print all link, and that's for printing, but we've also found out that sometimes for people who have this visibility, low visibility, or just other issues, or potentially even someone who's just not comfortable with content, they can get this print all link, which will actually have everything on a single screen and just offer a simpler viewing option. There's also no flickering pictures. There's no strange mouse overages, things like that. It's this very simple navigation that can also be just done with keyboard shortcuts. So here is again, there's nothing to it. You're using SoftChalk. You use a style sheet, you use this, you've got a real accessible content right there. And I hit the wrong button. Now this is where it gets a little more complicated. Both the last two things is navigation. Navigation is a complicated thing for usability. It's complicated for accessibility. Images probably are less dealing with usability. This is a pure accessibility issue. When I used to design lots of web pages, don't do that as much anymore, not pure web pages. If I was wanting things done accessible, I really needed to think about the images. And it's really easy to meet Section 508 standards and just put in random alt tags in images. If you are big on doing web pages and you want everything accessible, you can have an automated service check to make sure your web pages meets accessibility. All those automated web pages look for, and requirements of 508 is that there's alternative text put in for every image. But sometimes that gets misunderstood by people. So let's think about this blind student who's having JAWS read things. He's on a web page that has lots of images on it that really don't mean anything. For him, it doesn't matter. They're pretty images. He doesn't need to have a whole bunch of alt tags saying pretty tree, pretty background, girl on, girl sitting on beach, student in classroom. He doesn't care about that. He wants the alt text that means something. So as a web page designer, you've always had to struggle that you've got to put those alt tags in there that mean something. Now, you still have to do some work on SoftChalk when you're inserting images, and I just have a screenshot here putting in an image. I still need to select my image, but right there, SoftChalk's going to give you the option of alternative text. Now, this is a bad example right here, and I did that on purpose. If I put this alternative text on there, and the name of that alternative text is on this page.jpg, Think about that student who's reading out loud, having JAWS read it. Does he need to know the name of that JPEG file? So you put a nice alternative. You put some kind of alternative in there that makes a difference to him. Now, if it is, you know, some images that don't mean anything, there's some tricks around that. We can talk about that offline. But for the most part, you think about that when you're designing. Are you just throwing images up there that don't mean anything? That's fine, and there's place and time for that. But if you're just designing content, you probably want images that mean something. It's a screen of, I don't even know what this one was, but you want to describe that in some detail, so the student who can't see that but could at least understand, oh, that's a picture of a chalkboard or whatever, something that means something. And there's ways, obviously, you know, if it doesn't mean something, you have to do something different. But SoftChalk makes this easy, whereas if you're designing regular web pages, it's not as easy. Even if you're using a web page design thing, I mean, I hate to talk about front page, but you know, Dreamweaver, all these older systems, it can be done, but it's not as clear, where SoftChalk makes that much clearer. But like I said, the bigger issue is that the worst thing on accessibility is people trying to make images meet that Section 508 standard, but still not think about what the student needs. And that's still something we have to think about with images. Tables are very, very similar, because think about this also. I always go back to the blind student, because that is, first of all, something I've had experience with this student. You got to think about the way that, how they're going to navigate this web page if they can't see it. Tables are the same way. When that blind student's mousing over the page, he can't tell the difference between what a table is. What happens in SoftChalk is you don't have to do too much. You make a table, you put your different items in the table. Right there, you're done. SoftChalk takes that and puts it in an accessible format so that it's easily read by screen readers. Even if you don't really have any real formatting, that it's just, you know, it's just a formatting table. It's not, you know, a table of, you know, a chart or something like that. It's still, SoftChalk takes it and puts it into that perfect format. So right here, here's another one. You don't have to do anything. It just automatically makes that accessible. Now, if I'm doing regular web pages, I need to go in through the code, and there's lots of things I need to do to make Section 508 meet for tables. With this, I really don't have to do almost anything. So once again, I'm going through lots of these features, and right there, you don't have to do anything. And I really, that's one thing I appreciate very much with SoftChalk.
And Richard, we did actually have a couple questions.
Yeah.
So Jim asks, before when you're talking about the alt text, said would you put your alt text in the long description box? I think it was on the previous slide.
You actually put it in the alternative text one, and right there, I purposely put this picture because this is the wrong way to do it. What I would do is, instead of where it says on this page.jpg, that's not appropriate alternative text. Now, long description is something different, and that actually is a good thing to add too. But you want to actually maybe give that a real description. On this page.jpg doesn't tell that blind student what that does at all, if that makes sense. The long description just gives you a little bit more. When you mouse over, it gives even a little bit more detail.
And we did have another question about JAWS. I'm not sure how much you know about the JAWS program, but Tim asks, how do you get it to jump to the main content instead of reading everything from top to bottom or left to right?
I do know lots about JAWS. Obviously, I'm more of an observer on JAWS. The student I used, he actually used a mouse, even though he could not see it. There is keyboard shortcuts, things like that. I don't think I know enough about that to answer that.
Okay.
But I would always recommend that even if it's just you putting a blindfold on, or find a student with low visibility who uses JAWS. One of our work studies at my college has very limited visibility, and she doesn't use JAWS often, but you know, occasionally I have her test things out. That's your best thing if you can do that. But no, I'm not an expert on JAWS. I'm pretty experienced, but not an expert.
Okay, and I'm not sure if you know this, but do you know if there's a length requirement in the long description box on SoftChalk? I'm not aware of there being one.
No, I don't know either, actually. But that's something we can look into.
Yeah, definitely. And then someone also asks, can you talk about what a good example of a good description would be for that?
Okay, I can't remember what this image is, but what I would put in, let's say this was a picture. I don't think it's I want to say that's a math equation in there. It's my own image. I can't even remember what it is. But let's say that's a math equation. I might put in there example math equation. Oh, yeah, that's a little simple. That's not great. And honestly, the blind student doesn't even care about that. So there's not one perfect answer. But the worst thing you can do is what shows there. Don't put on this page .jpg.
Right.
And I see that so often. Now the thing is, if you take that image and plug it in and do an automated test for Section 508, guess what? That passes. Do you think that's good? No. So I'm not sure I always have a great, some images are going to be clear cut. You'll figure out that this makes sense. Let's say if it's a chart, it's a chart about basic. I'm not a mathematician. My wife is. I'm making up things as I go on that part. But let's say it's a mathematical equation. I might put a very, very short 3 words, if I could, about what that math equation is. And obviously, I would try to make sure my content references that in more detail someplace else, if that makes sense.
Okay, that does make sense.
There is no. This is where SoftChalk can't fix everything for it. You've got to be a little creative about making sure there's an alternative text for that. Also, think about that. If you can't figure out something's a good alternative, you may or may not want to use it. We all love pretty pictures, everything, but let's say this is a good example, and I hate to throw one of my instructors under the bus, but I'm going to. I'm not going to mention her name, but she teaches a class, a PE class, and she has lots of just pictures of people working out and things like that, and it clutters the page. Well, for us students with no accessibility problems or people who are very good about using that content, none of that clutters my page. It's no problem. But if I have any issues, I really don't need to see the person doing jumping jacks. So think about that when you're doing your content. Are you just putting things there pretty because you like them? That's fine, but it doesn't necessarily help the content. So it's just it's a tough issue to deal with, and SoftChalk's going to lead you to the right way, but you have to really sort of finalize it right there on your own.
And one last question came in. Actually, Donna has shared a great tutorial on alt text in the chat window, so I'll post that link into the chat so everyone can see it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things out there, lots of great resources, and everyone should take a look at those because there isn't one just perfect example, and I would love to see that one.
Yeah, I will post those. And then one last question just about
tables also would be very similar. There's lots of thought on how the best way to put tables for this kind of stuff. So tables and images, not at all the same, but the same kind of thinking behind it has to be done.
And so Sharon asks, she says, I have been taught that screen readers cannot read bullets and that numbers should be used instead. Is that true?
Generally, that's a yes, except that screen readers are getting better and better. I'll give you an example. Coming up real quick, I'm going to talk about some alternatives to Flash and things like that. And one of the reasons we always look for alternatives in the accessibility field is because screen readers don't handle lots of these things well. Well, technology is getting better. And things like accessibility in lots of different parts, this technology is amazing. Companies like Apple, companies like Microsoft, some of the smaller accessibility companies, they've made some amazing, amazing strides in this market. You think about it, even like our cell phones, the technology behind Siri, the sometimes hated technology of Apple, all that technology came from the accessibility field, and it's some pretty interesting technology. But I would still be careful that, remember, just because maybe some of the new screen readers can do things, well, you may have someone at home who has the same version of JAWS that's 8 years old. So maybe a newer version will be able to handle something, but you have to sort of always think about who your target audience is.
Great. And we've had some comments from our audience members saying that screen readers, if coded properly, should be able to read both numbered and unnumbered lists.
Yeah, and like I said, I think it just depends on the version.
Right.
And I know that even at my college, I think our version's like 4 years old. So you have to really think about that. And the version I use to test things is the same version our students are using. So they're not always using the most up-to-date.
And those are all the questions that came up right now. So if you want to move on and everyone continue sharing your comments and questions.
Yeah, and this is what I really wanted out of this presentation. I want people to think about these kind of things. Soft Chalk, thankfully, Sarah, you guys have done a great job, and lots of this is taken out of our hands. Now we have to think sort of the bigger picture about that. So now this is a complicated one. This is something called HTML5. Now, before I go into HTML5, I want to talk to you why probably, I don't know why Soft Chalk chose HTML5, but I'll give you my opinion. Before HTML5 came about, and like I said, I'll talk a little more detail about that, but before HTML5, we relied on lots of plugins to do different activities, whether it was a Java-based plugin, a Flash, or Shockwave plugins, and those are always fun. They're fun for us who have no issues, or no site issues, or anything like that. Or even someone like, I play games. I understand these things. If you don't, sometimes those little quirks are not good, especially for someone without sight. They just have problems with that. Newer screen readers can even do things like Flash, things like that. But we're talking about what's happened in the past. Most of the time, screen readers could not handle things like Flash. So HTML5 is it's basically the standard HTML, but it's a newer standard of HTML that allows HTML developers or web page developers to do more of the content built into the HTML without relying on outside plugins. Now what that does for lots of things is it means we don't have to have outside plugins right there. One of the pages that's the most popular in the world is YouTube. YouTube is a very traditionally Flash-based program. Little by little, probably because Apple hates Flash, apparently, we're seeing even a page like YouTube, they're starting to change their videos to something called HTML5, where it no longer needs that Flash plugin. It can show a video right in line with the text. This newer standard of HTML allows that. Soft Chalk has lots of these different activities built into it that are HTML5, not Flash-based activities, but HTML5 activities. And I showed a screenshot here of the hotspot one, and I do teach geography online, and that's something that would be in my course. It's not, but I just sort of made that one up. But that's an example of an HTML5 activity. Charts, crosswords, the jigsaw puzzles, drag and drop, the different ones that come default into Blackboard, so when you add those into a course. Now what's good about this is that even pretty old screen readers, as far back as screen readers I've checked, they handle HTML5 pretty well. Also, just the standard Internet Explorer 9, Firefox, Safari, Chrome, all the big web browsers allow you to use keyboard controls. It's not always mouse-based. So all these different information and activities can be done by almost everyone. I actually used a hotspot quiz for someone who wasn't a non-sighted student, and he had no problem. Now it's not still probably the best tool for him, but just showed you an example that he was able to do something. Still not, I'm not really going to expect that he's going to exactly know where Pennsylvania is and things like that. Not the best resource for him, but it just shows you it's not excluding anyone. Once again, you don't have to do anything. This HTML5 activities, all this list here that's on the screen, they're accessible, ready to go. They meet requirements, things like that. I still think, like I said, with this blind student, I might want to mix up and not use just the HTML5 activities in my course. I want to maybe have some text-based tools, things like that. But right there, it's accessible, and that's all we're really striving for. Okay, there might be, I see the link here. That's good. we'll take a look at that. Okay, here's another SoftChalk built-in feature that is also just accessible. It uses JavaScript. JavaScript, unlike Java, JavaScript is more of a locally based just HTML coding technique. Obviously, our programmers out there know a little bit more about JavaScript. But JavaScript generally has been compatible with screen readers and is accessible. And the little built-in JavaScript quiz questions that you can add into SoftChalk, accessible. There's no problem. Mouse over, screen over them, tab through them. Everything is fine. You don't have to do anything. Once again, this is what I'm really liking about SoftChalk is it's taking lots of the nitpicky little 508, I'm trying to meet all the requirements things out of it. I do this in SoftChalk, it's all met. So there you go, nothing. Now, I'm not a mathematician, I already mentioned that. My wife is. She would understand probably what some of those equations are. Well, the thing that I would important, if I worked with a math, I don't even work with the math faculty on my campus, someone else does, but it has built-in MathML, which is a mathematical equation tool that's built in SoftChalk. This little example here, if this was put in my course, the screen reader has no problem reading that. Now, I am not a mathematician. I've never even seen the blind students that I use as an example go through that. I don't know how that gets read, but I've been told there's no problems with the equations at all on that. So that's a good one. It could be used for math, not a problem. And once again, built in. Now, SoftChalk has another cool built-in functionality, these little pop-up quizzes, which are just interactive quizzes that are built into lessons, so that right in your middle of your content you can have a little, self-check. Excuse me. I am a Quality Matters reviewer, and one of the things that drives me nuts in lots of courses that I review is there's one of the things we look for in Quality Matters is self-check work or self-work. It's not a 3-point standard. It's not a required standard. But it's one I really drives me nuts that I don't see more courses adding content, self-check works, things to sort of check my progress. Well, SoftChalk has this built in, things you can add right into there. Now, my first thought was, well, there's no way that could be accessible because that's using a little bit of JavaScript trickery, things like that. Well, guess what? It does. If you use the pop-up quizzes, it's accessible, nothing you have to do. So you see, I'm going through lots of these things, and when I say there's nothing you have to do to make them accessible, that makes me very happy, and it should make everyone very happy. Now, text poppers is another, when you can do pop-up text annotations, very similar to the quiz. It's a little more tricky, but if you use the pop-ups annotations, they're readable. Excuse me, gotta take a drink of water. These text pop-up annotations in SoftChalk, and I gave you an example of the little box that you can add as a text popper. They're accessible by screen reader. They also give you a link to just a separate text document that can easily read all this text. So you can make the page look cool, look interesting, using this text annotations that look interesting and draw in the normal student into your class, but you're not leaving out the people who just can't see that or can't function that, or even people who have problems. They get tired of seeing, maybe, I hate to say the older student, but the older student who usability, making something usable for them is difficult. You can make this sort of trickery appear in your page, but still give them that nice text annotation link. So there is a little bit of things you have to do here. You have to create the annotations. You have to do all that. But for the most part, it's accessible right there. Now, this is actually one of my last ones on here, but this is where there's a little bit more work for the faculty member. It's actually lots more work for the faculty member. But if you do this part right, if you use the built-in media tool of SoftChalk, I'll show you on this next slide. There's some things that you can do. If you used embedded media in a lesson, so let's say you've linked to a video that you have, an audio file, you could put it into SoftChalk. It looks nice, looks everything. It's great. Problem is, let's say you've got the deaf student, or not the deaf student, the blind student, or even a deaf student if it's an audio presentation. You want them to have their alternative. Or you have the older student who doesn't understand how to use the video, or the 20-year-old who they can do YouTube all day but they have no idea how to look at embedded content. There's a variety of reasons why we do usability and accessibility. This allows you to embed the media in there and then give a text alternative, a text description for everything. So I'm actually going to go to the next slide because this gives you a better example. Let's say I'm inserting the media. Now, I inserted an audio file. Probably more likely you're going to insert a video file. But let's say you insert the video file. You select the file. Now you can describe that, and you describe it in great detail. I'm even going to go back to the last slide. So that when you have, you describe it, you will then get a link. The students will see a link or be able to mouse over a link to a separate document that actually shows that text description of that. It also has a link that maybe that media can be opened up in an external player, because sometimes that's easier for someone. So it gives you lots of different options, but it's a little more tricky. It's not like you can just pop that video in there and it's automatically going to give a screen description or something like that. Similar to images, you've got to be a little tricky about this. You've got to figure out which way you're going to describe that to someone. It could be that you describe it with an option, tell the student that there's a text version someplace. Different things like that. It's not something that you can just pop into SoftChalk. It's going to solve that for you. You do have to do a little bit of thinking about how you want that shown in there. Most of the time it's not a problem. It's an audio file. The deaf student has no problem. I mean, the blind student has no problem. The video, you know, if they usually can hear everything. Maybe the deaf student is the one with the more problem because they can't see if your video doesn't have closed captions, things like that. But it's just a little bit of things you've got to think in there. And SoftChalk gets you part of the way, and there's a little bit of things you've got to think on your own. So for the most part, that's it for what I have today. But like I said, I hope I have some more questions. And then I really invite people to contact me. My email address will be up on the last slide, is rsmith@hartford.edu, and that's Hartford without a T. It's like Hartford, but no T. And I'd like you just to email me, and we can talk a little bit more about accessibility, things like that. But if there's anything else that came up?
Yep, actually, we do have a couple questions.
Great.
So Jim asks, if you make a flash movie of diagrams or PowerPoints and add any narration, can screen readers play the animation and narration?
Usually that's not a problem because the screen reader is just usually a plug-in on top of a regular web browser. So they're probably going to be able to do that. You're just not necessarily going to see the animation. That's the problem. And the screen reader technology is getting better and better, so probably some of the newer ones are going to be able to handle that. But there's no one answer to that at this point.
Okay, and then we also had a question about video. Do videos need to be done as embedded on the page in order to be accessible?
Generally, yes. But let's say you were talking, I assume maybe when you're saying, like maybe you're talking about YouTube videos, things like that.
This question is from Joseph, so Joseph, if you want to maybe elaborate more on your question, I can definitely ask more specific, but he just talks about video in general.
I'll go very non-specific on that. Embedding in it doesn't necessarily make it accessible. It doesn't mean it's not accessible. That's just it helps. So in a video some videos are accessible, some aren't. So embedding doesn't necessarily make a difference. It probably does make it cleaner, things like that. But also SoftChalk, if you do embed them, does give you that option of opening it into another window. Especially if it's like it's your own video, you're going to have that option of opening into its own media player.
Right. And then Raymond just made a comment. He said that the videos must be captioned as well.
Well, here's the thing. Video should always be captioned. There should also be text versions of it. That's a difficult thing to do. And this is a bigger picture question. I know in my own course I am using some videos. I don't actually have them used. I have them separate out of my SoftChalk content. I just have them on Blackboard because we have a link to Intellicom videos that are closed caption, and they come closed caption. That's not an issue. But let's say we're going to use, if I wanted to use similar videos that are not closed captions, I would have to do a couple different things. I would either have to find a way to caption them, or I would need to meet accessibility, to make sure I have alternative content that does the same exact thing. So you don't have to have them closed caption. Obviously, you want them closed caption, but as long as you do offer alternative content, and when I say alternative, they really should be exactly the same, because it's just not fair to have different content for one student versus another. But if you are able to offer alternative text-based, screen reader, accessible content, that's fine. So I don't want to say that videos have to be closed caption. That's obviously the goal, but as long as you have an alternate, and the alternate is clearly, that you clearly offer the alternatives for people who have issues with the video, you're still fine. And I don't even think that's a problem. Like I said, as long as it's the same content, what's the matter?
Lavis, she just made a comment that the program Amaria, A-M-A-R-I-A, is a great tool for easy captioning programs.
And it is. That's a good one. There's a few other good ones out there.
And it's free as well.
Yeah, and there's lots of paid services. One of the ones that you don't want to use is some of the built-in YouTube closed captioning, because first of all, it's free, but it is terrible. So lots of different options out there. You know, you can even do things. I have some federal work studies who work for me. If I really needed good content, I could have them go through and caption. As long as it's not a long video, they would probably kill me and stop working for me. But if I, just had a short thing, I could have them do a little transcription. That would be fine. But there are some great software out there that's allowing this to be done. Just for some reason, Google's own technology doesn't do a very good job of that.
And then a couple other people are mentioning tools that they use as well, and I'll put those into the chat panel so everyone can see those.
And that would be great.
And we did have another question come in from James. Do screen readers read what is under the metadata, or how exactly is that used?
Screen readers tend to ignore anything like metadata, because remember, they're not at the web browser. They're actually they're trying to be the eye of the student and read out exactly what the student's essentially mousing over. So it's going to very much ignore the behind-the-scenes part of a web page.
Okay. Yep.
Unless the student wants that. If you have a student who wants to see, the metadata of a page, student, just like anyone, they want to see the source of a page, things like that, the screen reader can do that too. But for general purposes, screen readers don't do that.
And we did have another question / comment come in. So Dan talks about captioning text and videos in a second language class, and she's saying it kind of defeats the purpose of a listening exercise if the students can look up the text. So do you have any suggestions to offer for that sort of situation?
Yeah, that is a tricky one. You're right. I think that's a big picture thing that you have to think about, if in that course that you're offering, let's say a good chunk of your students are having accessibility issues, but you don't want them essentially finding the answers because they're learning the text versions, you may have to think of other ways potentially to teach the content to the students than using that technique. Now, if literally if you've got only an occasional student who has an accessibility problem, or need, you may be fine with occasionally doing something like that. But that is a big picture thing that you may have to change some techniques to realize that if you're having students with needs, that you obviously can't solve it by giving them the answers. So there's not a technical answer to that. Like I said, that's a very big picture rethinking of things. And I certainly don't even know where to go with that, actually.
And one last question that I noticed, which is better to use, is it inline player or to link to a file? I'm not sure.
Well, what it does is when you do add it, it will build an inline player, and then you get an option to actually have that player be then brought out of the inline web page. So you actually have both options, and it's built in, so that's not a problem.
And it looks like that is actually all of the questions that come through. We have had some questions about, I see that you've just put your contact information on the screen. Great. Well, if anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to type them in the questions panel. Richard, I'm going to go ahead and take the screen back. And
okay, and I will just mention one last thing before I go, is that I hopefully will be presenting at the Soft Chalk conference in October.
Yes.
This is one of those that, Sarah and I will be talking a little bit about this, and some of those Soft Chalk members, that this kind of discussion is very much a roundtable type discussion, and there's a place for obviously some more technical side of it. Could even be more than one kind of things. But that, if you are around for that conference, I think we'll, have a good place to talk about this. And the more and more we can get people thinking about just making their course both usable and accessible, get that mentality out there, we can maybe fight against the people who just don't seem to be that concerned about it. Like I said, I have the same problem at my own college. It drives me nuts when our whole web page doesn't meet accessibility. So the more people we can just get going on this, it really does help everyone's course to be better, and then it's also going to help probably meet lots of Quality Matters standards too. So it's a win-win for everyone.
Definitely, and I did send out links to the conferences, and I'll also be posting a link on registration for other webinars in the rest of this series. So thank you again, Richard. Thank you so much for this presentation. We definitely learned a lot from it.
You're welcome.
And I'll go ahead and take back the screen. So this is just a quote that, nope, you're not seeing my screen yet. So like I mentioned before, the examples that we shared today and that will be shared throughout the rest of this series represent how our presenters took a Quality Matters standard. In this situation, it was Standard 8, which is accessibility, how they adapted it to best fit their own unique situation when creating online courses. We encourage everyone else to share their own best practices in online course design by tweeting us at SoftChalk or at QM And we do have a hashtag, which is hashtag SCQMBP. If you want to tweet us your best practices, we will be featuring some of the good tips on our website. And also thank you to everyone who posted in the chat panel. There were some really great tips and questions that came through there as well. And like I said, keep a lookout for our upcoming webinars in the series. I'll post a link to our best practices page where you can be on the lookout for registration. I will be opening registration very soon for our June session, which will be on promoting learner engagement and interaction in online courses. And we do have webinars scheduled through the month of August, and we will have one in September as well. So if you'd like more information, I know Richard had his email address on the screen earlier, but here's his contact information again, and if you need more information about SoftChalk or about Quality Matters, you can tweet us or visit our websites as well. And thank you, Richard, again so much for presenting, And if anyone else has any questions that were unanswered, please let us know. My email address, which is not on the screen, is Sarah, S-A-R-A-H, @softchalk.com. So if there's any unanswered questions, please feel free to shoot those our way. And we look forward to seeing everyone at future webinars and hopefully at the conference in October. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And one thing I forgot to mention is that this session is recorded, and I will be sending out a link to the recording later on this week in a follow-up email. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Jim, Richard, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon.
Thanks, Sarah.